but
Lloyd, I need to ask you. You can't just sit and speak forever. Debate in the House of Commons got pretty nasty, and one MP, Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle, called Conservative MP Miriam Cates transphobic for what she had to say in Parliament. Let's have a little listen to what Lloyd Russell-Moyle had to say.
Goodness me, that speech was probably one of the worst transphobic dog whistle speeches that I've heard in an awful long time. The idea of linking trans people with predators, frankly, is disgusting, and you should be ashamed.
Well, very feisty scenes. Also booing and heckling of fellow Labour MP Rosie Duffield when she made similar points. I heard what Miriam Cates had to say. Nothing transphobic in it at all, but delighted to say that Lloyd Russell-Moyle, Labour MP for Brighton Kemp Town, is joining us right now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Calling an MP, particularly a woman MP, disgusting for talking about the need to protect women's safety and safe spaces from sexually predatory men. Are you proud of yourself?
Well, that's what she was talking about, and what she said is that the ability to change your gender would give predators, people like Rochdale, easier access to children's spaces. She knows that's untrue. It is not founded at all. There is a decent argument about women's spaces, gendered spaces, same-sex spaces. I might have a different view on that, but I wouldn't call that transphobic. I would call it misguided. But to say things that you know is totally untrue, she said that it would be like the Rochdale repeated. That's what she said.
Rochdale, the Grim Gates. No, but this is
about Rochdale,
but it
and
is.
That, I'm afraid, is dog whistle transphobia. I did apologise quite rightly for my tone.
Your tone,
totally
yeah,
wrong.
Absolutely,
totally wrong.
Lloyd, I need to ask you. You can't just sit and speak forever. We haven't got much time. We've been trying to get you on the line for the last 5 minutes, mate. Come on. Well, I don't know what's wrong with MPs. You can't use Zoom.
I've been on the picket line with the RSA.
Yeah, but you were booked onto my show. I want to ask you some questions. Okay, here's the thing. Right. Women raising concerns about child safety, girls' safety, boys' safety, but also women's safety, talking about safe spaces, is not transphobic. It is a point about sexually predatory men, sexual deviants, sexual predators, being able to exploit laws that are meant to make life easier for people with gender dysphoria, trans men and women, to exploit those laws and those loopholes to gain access to girls' toilets, girls' changing rooms, women's changing rooms, women's prisons, and the like. We know that that's a serious risk because it's already happened. It's already happening. It's happened in refuges, it's happened in toilets, it's happened in changing rooms, it's happened in women's prisons. It's well documented. There are legal cases. It's a perfectly legitimate thing to raise. It's not transphobic. It's not an attack on genuine trans people who, certainly the people I've spoken to, are as horrified by this gender self-ID as anyone else.
Well, I'm afraid it's just not true to say that it's very well documented that this has happened in any larger numbers than it is happening already.
It's happening already because people aren't challenging people because they think the law allows a man to come into a woman's changing room.
No. But what she was talking about was that the ability to change your gender will suddenly allow you to work with children, and it puts children at risk. That is just not true, and it is the same arguments that were used about Section 28. I remember those arguments on Section 28. Even Labour colleagues at the time used them to say Section 28 was just there to protect children, to make sure predators couldn't get in and spread their ideology in schools. I'm afraid those arguments, that dog whistle argument, is the same. I agree with you, however. There is, and I said this later on in the speech when I had calmed down and rightly apologised afterwards about the initial outburst, that there is an argument about how we do same-sex spaces. As a gay man, I actually really appreciate sometimes single-gender spaces to be able to be with other men, other gay men usually, to be able to talk about sensitive issues. And I know that my women friends and colleagues, for a safety level, even more important, appreciate and need that as well. That is a different discussion than saying that predators will be able to get access to children more easily, because it's just not true. Because having a gender recognition certificate
but changing your gender, we've seen again the idea you mustn't dead name someone. Someone changes their gender and they are accepted, therefore, from a man to being a woman, but they've got a history of sexual assault or predatory behaviour towards children.
Well, if they have a history of sexual assault, then they're not allowed to get a GRC that is explicitly said that in the Scottish Act. In fact, they put those additional safeguards in so that if you do have
after
that
an amendment was demanded by people raising that concern.
Quite right. That's how the process of a bill works. You get amendments when decent concerns are raised. Decent concerns were raised, and the amendments were.
But the key thing about this is that because someone doesn't have to go through any medical process, they don't have to be assessed medically, they don't have to go through any therapy, they don't have to cut anything off, they don't have to do anything at all.
They've never had to cut anything off.
I know they haven't, and that's why I disagree with gender self-ID. But the idea that
Lloyd, they don't have to either.
Lloyd. The idea that you or anybody else, any other man, with a beard even, could just say, I'm a woman, I can therefore, I've got a right to come into these single-sex spaces. Now, a lot of people think they're single-gender spaces. Under the law, they should be single-sex spaces. A 16-year-old boy could say, I'm a girl, I want to be in a single-sex girls' school. No, but this law will allow that.
No, I can change my gender on my passport and driving licence already as self-ID without this particular law changing one way or another. Now, there is an argument that you might want to put extra safeguards on passport and driving licences, but those are the forms of ID that people check. No one has ever asked me for my birth certificate. The last time I used my birth certificate, I think, was when I first applied for a passport, kind of when I was probably about the age of 13. No one has ever asked me for that. All this law is about is pension rights, and it's about death certificate and marriage rights, and it changes nothing else. Now, there is an argument to be had about safety in the wider sense of women, and this was the day, of course, that we found out that the Metropolitan Police had a mass rapist in their midst, and I and other women came forward in Parliament and said, we need now an independent process. We need the government to step up to actually make sure that the lived lives of women and other people in the metropolitan area, but also across the country, are safe, and we actually have convictions of sexual abuse. That's the real material
Who's going to disagree with that, Lloyd? You're quite wrong. When you talk about how this law doesn't really change very much, it does. That's why there's been this issue, because it does actually, Lloyd, it does actually come up against equalities legislation that exists in this country already, including allowing 16-year-olds to self-ID and to do it without any medical process whatsoever. That's what people are objecting to, because it can be exploited, and also, I think, and a lot of people think, will be dangerous for children, given what we've seen what's happened at the Tavistock Centre in London, which is why it's being closed down. The key thing here is, you talk about wanting to have a proper debate about this. The reality is, whenever any women, like Miriam Cates, like on your own side, Rosie Duffield, who's had death threats for speaking out, talk about women's safety, women's safe spaces, and concern about this, and also the biological reality of sex, and also the need to have our language have some meaning. Well, we know what a man and a woman is. People like you say dog whistle, transphobic, bigot. You're the people who are stopping us having a proper, sensible, reasoned debate. You're the people who are doing that.
For example, I disagree with Carmen Smith, or I disagree with Tonya on our side. I disagree with Rosie as well. But I'm not in the stage of calling them those things or shouting them down or booing them, because some of their points need to be addressed sensibly and in the cold light of day. Some of them are factually incorrect. Some of them actually exist already. Some of the people are arguing actually against any form of changing your gender whatsoever, and actually would like the current gender laws in Britain to be repealed.
But that's not transphobic either.
There's a whole swathe. Well, there's a whole swathe of views, but the idea that you then use misinformation and you use predators from Rochdale as an excuse to then engage in this debate, I'm afraid that is dog whistle. So I make the distinction there between one and the other, and it's fair to have those discussions, and I do have those discussions with lots of my colleagues. My view is, and what I said a number of years ago now, is that what we should do is organise a mediated process where we sit down with different parties and groups and work out a way forward.
I'd love to do that, but I know how it will end. Can I just finally, one question, yes or no? Is J.K. Rowling a transphobic?
I can't tell you what she is
From what you've read and what you've heard her say, is J.K. Rowling transphobic?
I think she has verged onto transphobic lines at times, but I don't think she's transphobic in her heart, no.
But she said transphobic things or written transphobic things, you think?
Well, I think that she has verged on baiting the community, the trans community, deliberately to wind them up, and I think that's a shame. We should be trying to deal with this in a cold, lighted way. It's difficult to do that.
Tell you what,
I grant you that I sometimes step over the line on the other side.
Yeah, I'm calling people disgusting for giving their views. Lloyd, I would love it.
We've all stepped over the line.
I'm going to message you after the show. Make sure you've got my number. Can you give me, I'd love to have just one example of an occasion when J.K. Rowling has been transphobic, because you'll be searching for the next 10 years, you won't find one. But that's the trouble. We can't have a sensible debate about this because one side is calling people names. Simple as that. Lloyd Russell-Moyle, Labour MP for Brighton Kemp Town. This is Talk Breakfast.
From the front page to the last word, bringing you tomorrow's news today and revealing the biggest stories as they develop. First Edition is the only place to get ahead of the game. Every weeknight at 10 p.m. And remember,
if you're thinking about it, we're talking about it.
First Edition, only on talkTV.
Good morning to you. God, it's a frustrating morning. But that is the issue, isn't it? It's just, you know, you can have a perfectly reasonable conversation there with that MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. He sounds perfectly reasonable. In fact, he genuinely thinks that someone like J.K. Rowling, you might not agree with a lot of her politics, but I defy anyone to find anything she's ever said negative, even a hint of negativity about trans people. Quite the contrary. She said quite the opposite. She's just talking about the need to protect women's safe spaces. If we've got a situation where someone who's never said anything transphobic at all is called the names that she is, and we have people saying disgusting about MPs who are raising issues despite getting huge amounts of abuse in the House of Commons from MPs, then there's no hope at all, is there?